Welcome, everybody. This is our 23rd meeting of the Standing Committee on Natural Resources, our second meeting in our current study. To our witnesses, I just want to say thank you for coming and welcome. Some of you may have been here before, but for those of you who haven't, as is obvious, we're doing this in a virtual format, which brings with it certain challenges like we need to be patient when others are speaking and not to try to speak over others. Listen, make sure other people are finished talking before you speak. All of the things that our mothers taught us when we were young children, basically. And if you need translation, there's a button at the bottom of your screen which should provide that for you. You're welcome to and encouraged to speak in either or both official languages. You will almost certainly be asked questions in both. If you're having any challenges, please feel free to raise your hand or raise your voice. My job in part is to keep track of time, which means from time to time I may have to interrupt and stop people if we're going over limits. We do have time limits for introductory remarks and questions. Having said that, each witness group will be given up to 5 minutes to make opening remarks, and then after all of the witnesses have finished, we will open the floor to questions. All of our witnesses are here with the exception of Benbridge, who will hopefully be joining us in due course. Anyway, so welcome everybody. We have Energir, Enerchem, Evelgen, and Fortis Inc. I think it probably makes sense if we just start in the order that you appear on the agenda, in which case, Ms. Trudeau, you would be starting us off. So the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Stéphanie Trudeau, je suis vice-présidente exécutive Québec chez Énergir. Je salue le président, les membres du comité. Merci de l'invitation. Tout d'abord, je me permets quelques mots sur Énergir. Énergir, c'est la principale entreprise de distribution de gaz naturel au Québec, mais je suis...
I'm proud to say that we are an energy company right now. At the start of the year 2000, most of our activities were linked to the distribution of natural gas, and then there was diversification in Quebec. We are owners of one of the biggest wind parks in Canada. In the United States, we produce and distribute electricity from hydraulic and wind and solar sources. And on the two territories, we distribute renewable natural gas. So today, the production and distribution is about 50% of the assets, which are about $8 billion. For gas, our business model has evolved and will continue to evolve. Last year, over the last 18 months, we developed a business plan for 2030 and even 15. We hope to be to supply varied and renewable energy. We want to stay relevant with our clients and the broader society in a context where our economy is going towards accelerated removal of carbon. We want to be part of that. So there are 4 major orientations to remove carbon, and we are trying to work towards added value. So quickly, the orientations, and then I'll get back to 2. First, improve our efforts. For 20 years, Energy is a pioneer. Second orientation, accelerate renewable natural gas in our network. We are working on this for the past 10 years, and this is the key. Third orientation, develop a strong link between the gas network and the electric network. Optimize the existing infrastructure in Hydro-Quebec to decarbonize at the lowest cost for the society. And the fourth orientation, diversify our activities in the new growth vectors, especially hydrogen, that we can put in our network. And I will get back to this point. With this plan, we are hoping to reduce the use in the building sector by 30% by 2030, and we hope to have carbon neutrality in 25 years. We are encouraging RNNR in Quebec, but in the next 20 years, we want to have at least 10% of renewable natural gas. You might ask if the demand would be available. I can tell you that we are not making any active promotion, and the supply, or the demand is higher than the supply. And it's a very competitive. RNG is a useful tool. We think we have to look at other forms of energy like hydrogen, and the gas infrastructure can be very efficient in stocking and distributing hydrogen. We're carrying out studies to determine how our network could participate in that. And in conclusion, I can suggest a few ideas, especially in RGN and hydrogen. Support production. This can be done through regulatory incentives requiring minimum content, as the Quebec government is doing, and also implementing pilot projects to develop ecosystems in Canada and support demand. Governments have to play a significant role in changing consumer habits, especially in supply practices. In Quebec, National Defense makes significant contributions. They use big quantities of RGN, so other departments and federal agencies should follow the example and using this energy that's competitive, renewable, and that doesn't require any change in equipment. Renewable and low carbon content would allow Canada to improve in its ecosystems and competitive cost. So we think that it's by having a diversity of energy sources that we can have a strong and low carbon economy. Thank you. I'm pleased to answer your questions.
That was perfect. You were right on time. Thank you. Next up from Enerchem is Mr. Boys. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yes, thank you, everyone. My name is Dominic Boyce. I'm CEO at Enerchem, and thank you for your invitation today. I'm pleased to participate on this on the future of renewable and low-carbon energy. A few words on Enerchem. We were founded in 2000, and we developed a unique technology in the world. And we are using non-renewable materials. This is a key link in circular economy. We can develop ecological products while having a sustainable solution for landfills. Over $850,000 in capitals were needed to reach this technological maturity. Last year with Shell, Proman, Suncor, Hydro-Quebec, and with the support of the Canadian and Quebec governments, we announced the construction of a biofuel factory for 850. Recyclage Varennes is producing materials based on non-renewable materials. And residual biomass, it's over 200,000 tons of waste a year, and annual production of over 120 million liters of biofuels. So, I would like to quickly describe the general Canadian context. I don't want to provide too many statistics, but according to the World Research Institute in 2018, Canada was the 10th largest greenhouse gas producer in the world, and these are still increasing despite measures put in place. Last week, Prime Minister Trudeau committed to reduce greenhouse effect emissions from 40 to 45%, and this is much more ambitious than the Paris Agreement. Paris also committed to come up with a carbon-neutral economy by 2050. We've taken firm commitments to reduction, and to attain these targets, we have to create favorable conditions. So let's do a brief overview. In transport, even though electrification efforts are necessary and important, but it will not be sufficient to significantly reduce greenhouse gases. And we have reached 44 million liters in gas and no significant drop over the recent years. Vehicle registrations, 36 million. Right now, there are less than 200,000 electric vehicles, 0.5% of the fleet. So once these targets are set, we have to move into action First of all, a few. The current absence of regulation, Canadian regulation for minimum content in biofuels from residual materials, and these standards is reducing the attractiveness of the Canadian market. The United States with RFS and businesses in California and Oregon, European Union with the renewable transportation obligation, they have already put in place ambitious standards forcing distributors to use biofuels produced from waste from low carbon content fuels. These standards create favorable market conditions for producers. For example, a liter of methanol or ethanol that we produce in our Edmonton factory today is worth over the double in California and almost 4 times in Great Britain, including transportation costs. Without competitive regulations, it will be hard to maintain these low carbon renewable fuels in the country. Compared to incineration, the goal is to burn waste and use the energy. The gasification platform in NECAM allows us to transform these into renewable chemical products. So we are a real alternative to landfills. And right now, our new Varennes factory allows us to reduce by 160 tons of CO2 the production of greenhouse gases in Quebec. Imagine the impact of 10, 20 factories. A few recommendations. Let's try to stay positive. If Canada wants to meet these ambitious goals in greenhouse effect gas reductions, we must create favorable market conditions and innovative solutions. We use the carrot and the stick. The carrot, Canada doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. There have been several programs used successfully in other sectors, petrol, electricity, gas. Governments have reduced the risk linked to the early multiplication of these wind parks. By giving long-term contracts, we must create a competitive market in order to draw private foreign investments. Canada has to come up with regulations that force people to include greenhouse gas reductions, and they must have sanctions when these rules are not respected. So in conclusion, I would like to reiterate what I said earlier. Canada has to come up with ambitious measures and set strong targets, but we must create favorable conditions for investments in innovative technologies. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Boys. Okay, next up we have from Evolution, Mr. Verlez. I hope I got that right.
Yeah. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Merci aux membres du comité permanent des ressources.
Thank you, everyone. I thank members of the committee for inviting me today to participate in this industry study for low carbon and renewable fuels. I'm pleased to be here with you today and to have the possibility of discussing the important role that these can play in meeting our economic goals. So let me introduce myself. I'm Frederic Verlet. I'm Vice President, Senior Vice President in Evolution. I'm supervising commercial strategies that are linked to our assets and business growth through acquisition, development, and investments in new technologies. Evolution is a Canadian Brookfield company. It's one of the first to be traded. It was founded in 1999 in Gatineau in Quebec with a portfolio of 3 plants along the Levier River. We have been working for over 100 years. Right now, the businesses and subsidiaries, we have 20,000 megawatts and assets of about $100 million. And it's one of the biggest renewable fuel plants in the world. In Canada, we have assets, hydrological assets, wind assets, and 1,900 megawatts. Our factories are in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia.
While we have traditionally focused on renewable power, we recognize that decarbonization will require diverse and sustainable solutions focused on accelerating the transition to a low-carbon energy future. We're currently working to expand our role into broader decarbonization solutions to help our partners achieve their carbon reduction goals. One such example is low-carbon hydrogen. Recently, we've announced our collaboration with Gazifère, an Enbridge company, to develop one of Canada's largest renewable hydrogen injection project to be located in Quebec. As part of this joint effort, we shared plans to build and operate an approximately 20 megawatt water electrolysis hydrogen production plant in the Outaouais region. This plan will use renewable electricity from our Masson facility to produce renewable hydrogen. This will be the first large-scale project in Quebec and Canada to produce renewable hydrogen for injection into a natural gas distribution network, a model with significant expansion potential. In Canada, there's high potential market depth for low-carbon hydrogen given broad use across hard-to-abate and carbon-intensive industry. Facility will generate considerable environmental and economic benefits regionally, provincially, and nationally. Specifically, the project will avoid approximately 15,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emission per year, in addition to generating significant local economic benefits, including new jobs and additional property tax revenues. Over time, our focus will be on expanding to additional end uses and replicating this model at other facilities, including new renewable power facilities dedicated to hydrogen production. We believe that our hydrogen efforts are in line with the policy objectives of the Canadian federal government and those of many provinces across Canada, which have been expressed through carbon reduction targets, hydrogen strategies, and clean fuel requirements. In the current environment, hydrogen can also play an important role in our post-pandemic economy recovery, stimulating investment and job creation. That said, sizing Canada's hydrogen opportunity is not without challenges, and the involvement of governments is necessary to maximize this opportunity. Specifically, we see a role for government in creating clear, straightforward, and responsive policy and regulatory framework for hydrogen production, distribution, and end use, with an initial focus on near-term application, helping to reduce production costs through direct investment and creating value streams for low-carbon fuels, helping to overcome technological and cost barriers associated with transporting hydrogen, such as through the creation of shared use infrastructure, supporting end-use uptake, and finally, facilitating access to financing. By working together with governments and all industry players, strongly believe that Canada can become a leader in the production and use of low-carbon hydrogen and biofuels. Thanks again to the committee for allowing me to speak today. Look forward to opportunities to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Velez. Okay, next up from Fortis Inc., we have Mr. Hutchins.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging Fortis's respect for Indigenous peoples in this place we call Canada, and on whose traditional territories we all live, work, and play. Fortis has long supported engagement with Indigenous communities and building strong relationships based on respectful dialogue that creates mutually beneficial opportunities. At Fortis, our core responsibility is to deliver safe, reliable, and affordable energy in an environmentally responsible manner that respects the communities we serve. These values are reflected among the 5 companies we operate across Canada, in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador, as well as those that we operate outside of Canada. Across North America and the Caribbean, we deliver energy through 10 utility operations to more than 3.3 million customers. As an organization operating both electric and gas utilities across the continent, we have unique expertise and perspective to inform energy and climate policy. We believe achieving the national targets identified by the Government of Canada is a shared responsibility. We recognize the important role that we play in supporting efforts to combat climate change, invest in the infrastructure and transformation in Canada, and supporting the advancement of Indigenous peoples. Our Wataynikaneyap Power Partnership with First Nations in Ontario and our corporate-wide target to reduce carbon emissions are 2 examples of our commitment in action. We are targeting to reduce Scope 1 emissions by 75% by 2035 from a 2019 base year. That target is now driving our investment plans with more than 70% of our $4.3 billion 2020 capital plan dedicated to asset resiliency, modernization, and cleaner energy initiatives. A further example is in BC, which remains a leading jurisdiction in North American climate policy. Our local utility, FortisBC, provides both electricity and natural gas to over 1.2 million homes and businesses across the province. 2 years ago, FortisBC launched their plan to reduce emissions called the Clean Growth Pathway to 2050. This plan outlines numerous actions that will contribute substantial reductions in greenhouse gas emissions by harnessing the decarbonization potential of their gas and electric delivery systems. Included in these actions is a stated goal to aggressively increase the supply of renewable natural gas in their system and advance hydrogen development. By 2050, FortisBC envisions a future where the majority of gas within their system will come from low carbon and renewable sources. Many of these actions are reflected in the provincial climate strategy, Clean BC, including a target of 15% renewable content in the gas stream by 2030. With this as background, the following recommendations merit consideration of the committee as it deliberates on these matters. First, to recognize the massive potential of the gas system to deliver emissions reductions. We recommend continued support for the growth of Canada's renewable gas sector with a policy that preserves a role for natural gas in the building space. We should develop a Made in Canada pathway that leverages our existing gas and electricity infrastructure to achieve net zero and make Canada a global leader in renewable gases. As I mentioned, BC has established a 15% renewable gas mandate for 2030 as part of their Clean BC climate strategy. FortisBC has been delivering renewable gas to their customers for more than a decade now. This single action within Clean BC will deliver more than 3/4 of the emissions reductions in the building space outlined in BC's climate plan. And FortisBC is well on track to meet and exceed this target through near-term investments in biomethane and developing medium and long-term pathways to develop BC's hydrogen resources. This is why policy must preserve a role for gaseous energy delivery so that the benefits of these low-carbon fuels using the strong infrastructure that exists can be realized through their delivery to customers. FortisBC commissioned Guidehouse, a respected global consultancy, to enable our utility to engage with and support an actionable decarbonization strategy for BC. FortisBC undertook this project because they knew that we needed specific Made in BC pathways that reflect the unique constraints and opportunities of a winter peaking system and to decarbonize as quickly and cost effectively as possible. The results show that a diversified pathway can achieve our long-term emissions reductions targets with lower costs and lower risk to society. A diversified pathway that uses both our existing gas and electric infrastructure is shown to be less economically disruptive while also maintaining energy affordability and resiliency for our customers. In the same way that the electric grid allows for increasingly low carbon electrons to be transported, the natural gas grid should be viewed as a way to enable increasingly low carbon molecules to be transported. Second is to provide clear policy signals on the role of the gas system in a net zero environment. We recommend policy development that provides clear support for investment in long-lived energy infrastructure in Canada and the role of innovation. Climate policy, energy policy, and on-the-ground operations are under constant transformation, while energy infrastructure has long planning lead times, long service lives, and significant costs. In order to meet our needs and climate imperative 10, 20, and 30 years from now, we need clear policy signals on a complex landscape, including renewables and transmission and natural gas. That's required today. Ambiguity forestalls innovation, investment, and actionable, achievable business changes. The energy transition is occurring.
Mr. Hutchins, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up, please.
Perfect. In conclusion, Fortis is highly supportive of this committee's work to better understand the role of the low carbon and renewable fuel sector in this transition. We have the unique viewpoint of a company with a continental footprint and has been working on this since its inception. We want to see Canada succeed, becoming a greater destination for global energy investment and a leader in clean energy development while protecting the environment, advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, opportunities for all Canadians. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Hutchins. Okay, and last up we have Enbridge. Thank you, Mr. Trahan and Ms. Hanson for joining us. Sorry, I'm glad you got your technical challenges behind you. So combined, or the Enbridge will have up to 5 minutes for a presentation, and then we're going to turn it over to questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I want to thank all of you for undertaking this study of the low carbon renewable fuels industry and how we might, working together, advance these industries in Canada to create new jobs, maintain energy security, reliability, and affordability, all while addressing climate change, including our country's recently announced goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030. In our view, low carbon and renewable fuels will be a significant part of Canada's low emissions future. My name is Cynthia Hansen, and I'm the EVP and President, Gas Distribution and Storage at Enbridge. I'm fortunate to lead the Ontario-based Enbridge Gas Inc., which follows the amalgamation of Enbridge Gas Distribution and Union Gas, as well as Gaz et Fer, which serves the Gatineau region of Quebec. Je suis accompagnée par Jean-Benoit Trahan, Director General.
Mr. Trahan, Director General of Gaz et Fer.
Operates North America's largest natural gas utility by volume and third largest by customer count. Enbridge Gas and its affiliates deliver safe, reliable service to about 15 million people in Ontario and Quebec through 3.8 million residential, commercial, institutional, and industrial meter connections. We've been delivering energy for over 170 years, so our perspective on the promise of Canada's low emissions future is informed by decades and decades of experience. My comments today will focus on hydrogen and renewable natural gas, or RNG. Enbridge was an early investor in both hydrogen and in RNG and is very experienced in RNG. On the hydrogen front, our journey started in 2011 when we partnered with Cummins Inc., formerly Hydrogenics Corporation, to establish a collaborative joint venture to create and advance the renewable hydrogen market in Ontario and North America more broadly. The culmination of this joint venture was the construction of the first and largest power-to-gas renewable hydrogen plant in North America, located in Markham, Ontario. The plant was a platform for Cummins to showcase its world-class leading proton exchange membrane electrolyzer and fuel cell stack technology. For us, it's an important expansion of our renewable energy portfolio, establishing and growing the market. This past November, we announced the next phase of our hydrogen journey in Markham, a $5.2 million project supported by Sustainable Development Technology Canada to blend renewable hydrogen gas into our existing gas network. This project will be the first of its kind in North America and will be in service this fall, and this project will unlock additional value in our larger scale hydrogen blending activities in other parts of our distribution system. In Ontario, we have a number of exciting hydrogen opportunities under development. We're looking at leveraging our 4 strategically located compressed natural gas stations along Highway 401 to create a green hydrogen corridor. We're approached regularly about new hydrogen projects, and we're looking at bus refueling facilities, new power to gas opportunities, and several mobile and stationary power generation applications. We see opportunities in other parts of the country as well, including with BC's gas transmission and distribution system. Further, the opportunity to decarbonize Alberta's oil sands through a carbon capture, utilization, and storage solution that's fully integrated with ambitious plans to launch a local blue hydrogen sector is very exciting. And in Quebec, as my colleague Jean-Benoit can explain, Gaz et Fer aims to be North America's first natural gas utility to be 100% green by 2050. Hydrogen will play a large part in that, which is why in February we announced, along with our partner Evolution, a new $90 million, 425,000 gigajoules green hydrogen injection project. We agree with Canada's Minister of Natural Resources, Minister O'Regan, that hydrogen's time has come, but steps will be needed to take this opportunity. Finally, on renewable natural gas, we're involved in 3 significant RNG projects in London, Niagara, and Toronto, Ontario. And we're a partner in a biorefinery project in Lacombe, Alberta. And we recently celebrated the launch of Ontario's first carbon negative RNG bus in Hamilton. We've also launched an important voluntary RNG program for our customers in Ontario to empower households to lower carbon emissions. And just this Wednesday, we announced a major new partnership to execute projects in Ontario that convert organic waste into energy and utilize current Enbridge infrastructure to heat homes, power businesses, and fuel fleets, all while reducing carbon emissions. So we've done a lot in the hydrogen and RNG space today, but much more could be done with government support, including strategic investments and the proper regulatory and tax environment. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation over the next hour and a half. Thank you again for your time and leadership.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hanson. Okay, so we're going to start our first round of questions for 6 minutes each, starting with Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. My first question is for Fortis. You know, I calculate the price today for ACO, that's the Alberta natural gas blend, is about $2.50 per gigajoule of energy. Now, using a 100% blend of renewable natural gas, you know, for a business that burns over 3,500 gigajoules a month, you're looking at an increase in their heating bill of over 2,000% right now. And that goes across the board. Residents would pay an over 2,000% increase if they were to have a 100% renewable natural gas. How do you think businesses and residents are going to be able to afford this? And how many years do you think it will take for renewable natural gas infrastructure to get down to a reasonable price for Canadian businesses and consumers?
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. That's a great question and one that we talk about quite often. You have to make sure in the transition to cleaner energy resources that you are absolutely focused on customer affordability. And when you set climate policy and realize that you have to reduce the amount of carbon that you emit as a society, there's only so many options that you have. And what we typically talk about is the balance of those options between things like renewable natural gas and hydrogen from a fuel perspective that you can transport in a gaseous phase, and electricity. And what you have to compare is not necessarily the cost between, say, renewable natural gas and, you know, natural gas coming right out of the ground in BC that's methane. It's you have to compare that to the other opportunity, and the other opportunities are going to be things like coal, like carbon capture, utilization and storage, or electricity. So it's really shifting the paradigm of what you compare those costs to. And yes, you're absolutely right. When you look at the costs that we see for renewable natural gas now, it is in that $20 a GJ number that you brought up. And you look at the cost that's of gas coming right out of the ground, that is in that same range that you talked about, which is, you know, depending on the market conditions, anywhere between, let's say, $2 and $5 a GJ. So that's the picture that we have to see clearly, so that we can make those trade-offs and make them cost effective for our customers. At the end of the day, what you're looking at is comparing renewable natural gas as a heat source delivered to our customers, burner tip costs, to the same thing that they would need to get electricity from, say, renewable, hydro, whatever that clean energy is, transmitted to those customers for that same purpose. And that's where that economics has to be compared to.
You know, one of the comparative advantages that Canada has over, you know, its economic competitors has been our low-cost electricity, whether it's hydroelectricity in BC, whether it's our cheap natural gas in Western Canada, or hydroelectricity in Quebec. How do you think businesses and families are going to be able to survive if they're facing a 2,000% increase in their home heating bill or their business heating bill? Even if it's just a quarter of that number, how are they going to survive and compete at a 500% increase in their heating bills?
Yeah, and I would recognize, obviously, the great portfolio that Canada has from an electricity perspective. It is very clean to begin with. But when you look at the amount of energy and you look at the amount of capacity that would need to be added to, say, completely electrify the BC province, that would be basically in the terms of, you know, of projects, it would be about 8 additional Site Cs that would be needed to provide the capability to deliver that same amount of energy that the electric systems currently provides, and to replace the natural gas system. But when you have to look at it too, so I'll give you a burner tip / plug comparison. So when you look at that $20 per GJ number for renewable natural gas, that's equivalent to about 8 cents a kilowatt hour, which is still competitive with getting electricity from a province and providing that same heat source to our customers. So that's the difference. It's not, yes, there would be an increase in gas bills, and of course we're talking about leaping to that 100% renewable natural gas.
Well, even at 50%, even at 25%, the percentage increase remains static with very little change.
Yeah, you're right. The percentage increase, the bills, increases, but also you have to remember that the portion of the commodity on our bill is only about 20 to 25%. So the rest,
and you get all those fun delivery charges that you companies get to charge. No, that's good. I appreciate that. I'm wondering what's the life cycle emissions of biofuels as opposed to natural gas. I don't think we could say that biofuels are necessarily a net zero or a net negative fuel source. Maybe lower carbon. What is the the life cycle impact of carbon emissions with methanes and such?
Yeah, Mr. Lloyd, that's another good question. It gets about as close to net zero as you can. That's going to be something that has to be absolutely figured out on a going forward basis.
Are you counting the diesel that the farmers burn to grow the crops? Is that included in there? And the transportation?
It's really just the difference between that CO2 being released naturally from the decomposition process at that, say, farm or at a landfill, or being flared, whatever it might be, and capturing that. So it is truly, when you look at it on an apples-to-apples basis, a net zero from a carbon cycle, because there aren't anything that's additionally used to process that. Gas has to be worked into that equation as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lloyd. Right on time. Mr. May, over to you for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank all the witnesses. This is our second meeting on this study, and I am incredibly impressed with the number of companies across Canada that are focusing on the need to transition and really moving towards net zero and putting themselves in a position to succeed in that environment. And I am going to go back to Mr. Hutchins just to give you a bit of a heads up, but just to respond a little bit to the conversation we just heard. I want to push back a little bit, because I don't think anybody here expects us to be able to get this all done in 1 year. And I think that the reason we can't go to net zero all at once is because of those cost burdens. And I think that's what we've been saying for quite some time. This is a transition. This is why it's going to be a gradual transition over as many as 30 years. And I just think that the 2,000% numbers that we've been hearing just now, I think is a little disingenuous. But the more fuels that come online and are adopted, the more will be produced, and the cheaper it's going to become over time. This year, in 2 years, in 10 years. And Mr. Hutchins, I just wanted just to check to see if you could maybe comment to that. Sorry.
Somebody had a point of order, I thought, or was that?
Yeah, that was me, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Sorry, I think my colleague specifically referenced some real numbers that he pulled off the market, and my colleague, Mr. May, just seemed to indicate he was disingenuous by putting forward real numbers, to which Mr. Hutchins responded very well, I should add. But I'm just curious, what disingenuous means without getting into debate.
Sorry, I hope this doesn't cut into my time, Mr. Chair, but I will explain. I just think that there was no explanation in terms of what that number is how that number is being derived. And I think that if you look at the transition of what we're talking about.
Okay, you know what? Let's
guys,
just hold on. I'm going to stop this right now. Each of you are entitled to ask your questions, and pose the questions based on whatever information you have at your fingertips. And I think we can all agree it's not necessary to cast aspersions at one another. So Mr. May, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, Mr. Hutchins, given that the numbers that we're hearing, we're not talking about this all being in 1 year. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yes, just to clarify my earlier response and maybe tie a couple of those pieces together. When we were talking about, say, the $2 and $20 numbers there, that is for the commodity alone. And I think I referenced the percentage of the bill that is. So you have to look at the overall bill impact, but you also have to look at how these costs can come down and will come down over time. So it's really trying to figure out what those costs look like. And probably the most important point I could make today is the fact that we have no idea where or which process those costs are going to come down best and fastest in. So the thing that we have to think about from a policy standpoint is don't throw out any options early on. You have to make sure that you have the infrastructure so that if RNG becomes really cheap, if hydrogen becomes really cheap, if carbon capture and storage comes to light, if there's things that new technologies that come in on the electric or the gas side, that we can shift and make sure that we're utilizing the best possible resource to have the climate impact that we're looking for and the cost impact that we're trying to avoid. So it has to be that balance. And if you throw away any of the options early on, then we won't be able to shift or use what's most beneficial for our customers. And to be clear, that we are driven by what our customers and what policymakers want to do. And at the end of the day, if that goal is for our customers to want to reduce their greenhouse gas impact and they want to buy and pay additional, which they do, and in Fortis, BC, they willingly buy renewable natural gas from us because of the lower environmental footprint that it has, then our customers should be able to be free to do that. And if policy drives us in that direction, then we have to have all options on the table, and we got to know when to pull them off. But you can't pull them off too soon.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Mr. Hutchin, that clarification, because I get discouraged at times that my friends across the aisle they never calculate. They seem to never calculate the cost of doing nothing. And I hope we can all get our heads wrapped around the fact that this is a transition that is absolutely necessary for us. So, just again, Mr. Hutchins, can you maybe speak a little bit more about how can ensure that the sustained and long-term reduction of your natural gas networks GHG emissions? Like how can we assure the long-term reduction side?
Well, it is, again, looking at those balance of options. It's finding the cheapest renewable natural gas sources that we can. It is trying to get breakthroughs in technology on the hydrogen side of things. Hydrogen is going to play a big role, not necessarily within the current structure that we have, because we're doing studies right now with the University of British Columbia in Okanagan to figure out how much hydrogen we can put in our gas stream, still manage the burn rate, the customer effect and impact that we need to, and how that impacts our systems. Because at the end of the day, hydrogen doesn't transport the same way that natural gas does. It's a less dense fuel, so it needs higher volumes. So you can only get to, and also it can cause operational issues like hydrogen embrittlement within the existing pipe network that we currently have. We have to figure out solutions for that kind of stuff so that we can, again, figure out which of those paths. Is it hydrogen? Is it RNG? Is it carbon capture? Is it carbon capture at which end of the pipe? At the end of the day, you got to have the pipe or you can't ever make that decision. And that's our main thesis is you got to have that pipe. You got to have the pipe because it can transmit clean molecules just like electric transmission lines can transmit clean electrons. And as a point of clarity, Fortis,
very quickly, Mr. Hutchins.
Fortis is 80% electric. I just want to be clear on that we're 80% electric, 20% natural gas across North America. So we see both sides, and we want to make sure both sides get it right.
Thank you. And
thank you,
Mr. May. Okay, Mr. Simard, over to you.
Merci.
Thank you, James. I listened attentively, Ms. Trudeau, Mr. Bois, Mr. Verles, and there was something that seemed to come out for your presentation is the need of a regulatory framework. I believe it was Mr. Bois who said clear regulations on low carbon fuels. We had this discussion in a previous study on the forest industry, and something seemed relevant to me. Maybe it's just an aspect if the government in its contracts had a criteria related to the carbon footprint, the market would be better stimulated. It's just a general statement, but can I have some more details on what you understand by a regulatory framework? I believe Mr. Bois mentioned that and Mr. Verles, and then I would have another question for Ms. Trudeau later. Yes, Mr. Sima, I'm pleased to give it the first try, and then Frederick can add something. Yes, obviously, a regulatory framework leads to good behavior. If we look at the Netherlands, to take that example, or the United States, if we take a major petroleum corporation investing in production activities, low carbon renewable fuels. If we use our technology in the project of RN, we produce a negative carbon intensity fuel. Right now, the cost of production of this molecule is lower than the cost of non-compliance that the regulation imposes. So by creating this or using this stick, the petroleum companies strengthening the capacity, production capacity, and it leads to good behavior until we get to the compliance level or the cost of non-compliance. So this is an incentive to investments. In the Netherlands, just methanol, it's $1.35 Canadian a liter. Here, that same molecule with the same carbon footprint is 44 cents. So the only reason that explains that is the regulatory framework that obliges a corporation such as Shell to say, I will use the molecule where I can draw the greatest benefits in the world and where the cost of non-compliance is the highest. So in the absence of regulations, that is unfortunate in Canada. If we take our Edmonton plant, for example, we produce a low or negative carbon intensity. The ethanol produced in Edmonton was minus 20 based on the British Columbia system. But today it's better to go sell in the U.S. in California, so California takes advantage of that reduction of CO2 rather than Canada. Maybe just to add, I think Dominic explained very well and answered the question quite clearly. I fully agree with his arguments. For us, as a producer of renewable electricity, this is a way to make sure that we can competitively produce energy, produce hydrogen, which is an input in all these processes. So obviously, a regulatory framework would allow us to get to a level where it's economically viable for us to do it. So I'm not going to get into too many other details, but you have all the codes and standards related to transporting hydrogen through pipelines, issues of health and safety surrounding hydrogen, those also come into play. And Mr. Verles, I'll come back, but maybe Ms. Trudeau can join the conversation. I have a concern. Last week we discussed with the Deputy Minister, and the hydrogen strategy for Canada seems to give a very significant place to what we call gray hydrogen. So in a regulatory framework, in your opinion, shouldn't we identify these different types of hydrogen? Mr. Verles mentioned the hydrogen project that they did using hydroelectricity gray hydrogen for a ton of products would have inputs that would represent a lot of CO2. Shouldn't we have regulatory measures that calculate the carbon footprint on hydrogen if the government wants to go along those lines in its hydrogen strategy? Well, maybe a quick answer. We prefer to see this as intensity of carbon. We don't want to really classify it according to the color or the source or the means of production of hydrogen, whether it's produced by hydrolysis or unclean electricity. They won't have the same effects. In the regulatory framework, it would be necessary to recognize that the carbon intensity is a determining factor for the methodology and regulation. And I think people here on this committee would be better placed to complete my answer. I'm thinking about Jean-Benoit or Dominique.
For that segment, and we'll move on to Mr. Cannings, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you all the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to start with Mr. Hutchins in Fortis, if only because I not only pay my gas bill to Fortis, I pay my electrical bill to Fortis. And all that electricity is actually made in the west side of my riding. And there's a company that's developing a renewable natural gas plant in my riding that hopefully will be put into the Fortis pipes. First of all, I have two questions. One is just a clarification around your view of the world at 2050, the Fortis world. I just didn't catch how much percent of your gas production would be zero carbon, and that I thought you said 50, and that confuses me because I thought we'd be at zero by 2050. So that's my first question.
Yes, Mr. Cannings, nice to meet you virtually. Although I think I may have met you in one of the events that we had out in BC or in Kelowna over the past couple of years, as I've been involved in that province, overseeing the Fortis BC company now for I guess 3 years. So pleasure to at least see you here. Yeah, so we are on a path to make sure that we are being consistent with the Clean BC plan. So we look at those 2030 targets and 2050 targets, and I think probably the most important part is when we talk about net zero. What does that necessarily mean? It doesn't necessarily mean that every hydrocarbon that is being transmitted is not is being removed, because at some point you reach a point of the right economic point where you might still use methane and either use offsets or use carbon capture and storage or use some other means to offset those emissions. So the exact percentage along the way will change based on the economics, but the goal and the path have to be clear, that we're aligned with both our local governments and the Canadian government. I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's our job, is to follow policy.
Okay, and the other question I had is, you mentioned about using the best possible resource, and you talked about work at UBC Okanagan around perhaps seeing how you could move hydrogen with your gas. As my understanding, right now the limits are around 6% in moving that. From what I hear from other people in the hydrogen space, is that the best use of hydrogen is not to be mixed with natural gas. The best use of hydrogen would be in fuel cells, where it could be used to directly power, big trucks, trains, even airplanes. There was a hydrogen-powered plane, I believe, that flew in a test flight in Great Britain. So, what I've been hearing is that this plan to use hydrogen in natural gas is just kind of a distraction. Why aren't we going for green hydrogen used to power directly these hard to power sectors right now? They're hard to power with renewable electricity directly.
Mr. Canning's good question, and it's not one or the other. It's both or all of the above. Hydrogen should be viewed on different ways to be utilized within the economy to clean up the greenhouse gas emissions. It can be used as you mentioned, whether it's as a direct end source use for transportation fuel cells, whatever that might be. But you have to look at the economics of how much hydrogen costs to transport it to where you're using it. And then I know we talked a little bit about the different colors of hydrogen, but to make sure that we're looking at the carbon-free hydrogen, so that when we use it, say in our natural gas stream, which is also, I think, a very important path to use, because we can't necessarily get to the point where we can use 100%, say, renewable natural gas. So hydrogen will play a role in there. And you're right, when you look at the studies, I have heard everything from 5 to 20%. And that's why we're spending a lot of time doing that research, so we know exactly what it means for our system. And then, of course, you have to see how it behaves in your system, because every system is different. There's longer systems. There's systems that have different physical characteristics of the types of pipe, et cetera, the compressor stations. All of that has to be worked out so that you can get the right percentage for your system. But at the end of the day, I think if you looked at the sort of that diagram of the different paths that hydrogen can take, we shouldn't eliminate any of those paths now. We should see which ones we can use, because electrolyzers might not be cutting edge technology. The cost will come down because we'll start building more of them. That's manufacturing efficiencies and getting cost effective movement down that cost curve. But what we really need are some breakthroughs in technology. How can we break that hydrogen and oxygen bond apart cheaper than basically the brute force of electricity breaking those bonds? Or how can we what other ways are there of producing hydrogen that we can use?
Right on time. Thank you, Mr. Cannings. Okay, we're moving into the second round, 5 minutes each, starting with Mr. Zimmer.
Thank you, Chair. And my question will be for Mr. Hutchins, sir, for coughing. I will just say off the bat, I think as a Fortis BC customer myself, one of the biggest complaints we get in our office is that high gas bill that we get. And because you mentioned affordable, I thought it was fair to bring this up. Some of those delivery costs, not to mention added carbon tax, is making natural gas that we produce right outside our back door here, makes it very unaffordable to heat our homes in the winter. And we do well, of course, up in our area, but there's many Canadians that are simply struggling just to pay their gas bill. So I'll just leave it about that. I think conservatives care, maybe this is what something liberals should be more concerned about, is how affordable is all this and how affordable are some of these measures. My question for you, Mr. Hutchins, is, seeing that we already have over 200 years of natural gas supply, again, outside in the BC piece here, and we know it's affordable, semi-affordable the way it is. My concern is based on what Mr. Lloyd asked you before, was that this dramatic increase to that already, I said affordable, but very challenging gas bill that our constituents pay every month. Multiplying that or doubling that or even increasing that in any way is very concerning to me. So what are some comments around that? Adding renewable, either it's be hydrogen or renewable natural gas into the system, how much is that going to actually cost Canadians?
Mr. Zimmer, I don't have an exact number for that, but that's obviously something that we can follow up on. And it really does all depend on the cost curves on a going forward basis. And maybe I wasn't as clear as I should have been in one of my prior answers. The basis of what we should be doing from an energy policy perspective is trying to get as green as we can, as fast as we can, without absolutely the next thing that's got to come out of everybody's mouth is without sacrificing affordability or reliability. We have to make sure that the energy infrastructure that we have across Canada, the US, everywhere has to make sure that we never lose those two tenets. Those are the guardrails that we have to operate within. And when you get to one, you got to move back.
And thank you for that, Mr. Hutchins. I think considering that Canada's emissions, total are under 2% of the world's emissions, my opinion, seeing that we have all this natural gas, the best thing that Canada can do is really to get that natural gas to the world. Replace some of those higher emitting forms of energy in Asia and around the world. Yet this government seems to just focus inward on increasing prices for Canadians' resources to keep them warm in the winter. And it's a bit puzzling to me why more effort isn't made to get our product to that global market. I will ask you a specific question, though. I would like you to submit, and I'm not sure if you've done this study yet, evidence to the committee on the cost differential between renewable natural gas and regular natural gas. Because I think this is the answer that we need to provide to Canadians. Some of these ideas are great ideas in theory, but if it's going to dramatically increase the price of gas at their homes, and again, the price of heating their homes, I think we need to understand what that cost is going to be. And then I also would like to ask you, you might have that information. I will give you time to answer. But what is the net benefit in terms of carbon footprint of a renewable natural gas versus a natural gas right out of the ground?
Again, those are great questions and ones that we talk about quite often at our gas company in BC. And the cost differential, we do have studies on that. I obviously don't have them at my fingertips, but we can provide that. That's got to be part of the conversations from a committee standpoint to understand this, because what we do is we respond to policy. If the policy says the curve has to look like that, we try to find the most cost-effective way to meet the needs of that curve. On your other point, I can't miss this opportunity. One of the most important things that we can do is offset greenhouse gases outside of Canada, outside of BC, using BC natural resources like methane right out of the ground, turning it into LNG and sending it to Asia. We are big proponents of that. We have big projects that are based on that principle. At the end of the day, this is a global market. Look at the cost abatement curve and start from the left, the cheapest stuff to do first. It might not be spending money in a province or a state or a country that you want, but we have to remember that this is all part of a global climate policy discussion, and we should all be looking for knocking off those cheapest ways of getting the climate impact that we're looking for.
Thanks very much,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Zimmer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Mr. Lefebvre, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses here today. It's fantastic and really interesting discussion that we're having together. Maybe I know, Mr. Hutchins, you've been on the hot seat there, so I'm just going to maybe talk about the Wate project. Thank you for that. I know it's a game changer for our communities up in the Northwest, our Indigenous communities there. So, and I just wanted to give you a shout out on that. I know you mentioned it in your opening remarks. Monsieur Bois, to parler de...
Mr. Bois, they asked you a question about the regulatory framework. It was my colleague, Mr. Simard. I just want to understand better. You said because of the regulatory framework, by creating renewable natural gas, maybe hydrogen potentially, that it's more profitable rather than sending it to California, Holland, and so on. Could you share with us a little more? It's quite interesting that we want to create these synergies here, these renewable energies here and invest, but you're saying for the market it's actually better to go elsewhere. That's quite amazing. I just want to hear some more details from you on that. Yes, thank you. Indeed, it's around the cost on the CO2 emissions. The world operates based on an analysis of a life cycle, and we determine the carbon intensity or content of each fuel. So what I was saying is, in Varennes, the project will produce biofuels with a negative carbon footprint. So if, for example, California offers a cost of pollution of $200 for 100 tons of CO2 emitted. If in Canada there is no regulatory framework that puts a value on CO2 emissions, then I will go and sell this fuel on the market that pays the best price for each unity for each unit of carbon intensity. So this compared to gas has a carbon footprint of about 98, depending on the market. The product we come up with at Varan that we will do is minus 10. So you have 108 for $200 a ton of CO2. That is beneficial to the trader of that molecule. So what's happening today? Since there is no incentive to investments, when partners Shell, Proman, Suncor, the Quebec government invest in an asset in Quebec, this molecule with low carbon print, if I go to Quebec, I don't have a negative. I will lose money. So I would export to Europe, to the Netherlands, to California, or to British Columbia, for example. So the regulatory framework with the fuel standards we are looking at, would that play a significant role? For example, if you take the proposed clean fuel standards in Canada, 1 liter of ethanol would sell for 92 cents based on the current market price. So there is 25 cents related to the clean fuel standards. In California, the price is $1.59. So you can see quite a gap. So it's interesting that the world is going in that direction. And we see that Canadians are more recalcitrant. People don't want to go down that. It's an interesting debate that we could have within this committee. We don't have too much time left.
Obviously, you guys have a massive portfolio, and so we have some basic questions. Is like, what in your view is needed in order for low carbon and renewable fuels to become a more significant part of Canada's transition to a low carbon economy? You guys I'm sure have studied this left, right, and center. So I really want to hear you on that.
So just to confirm, was that directed at Enbridge?
Yeah, Enbridge.
Okay.
Yeah, Enbridge.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for that question. I think you're right. We're connected across the value chain. And as you've heard from the other speakers, we are focused at delivering that low, reliable, low cost energy, but still meeting the climate requirements. So what we think would be beneficial is to, be innovative in the tax system. So the budget proposal with the tax incentives, we think that that's an exciting step, and really getting the details of that in the next 90 days is important. And as we've heard, looking at that incentive to drive blue or green hydrogen production, if we want to have hydrogen as part of the solution, we need to build out that infrastructure. And as Mr. Hutchins talked about, you're not going to be able to pick and choose at this point. So we're going to need to build that broad strategy. The CCUS and tax credits, the concept that's been advanced by MP McLennan, I think has some interest for us. That looks like something that we can do, similar to what's happening in the US to really stimulate investment.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to stop you, unless you can finish that thought very quickly.
Grants and loans are important, lots of opportunities, multiple pathways, and just making sure that we focus on the near term, getting the industry developed.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Simard, over to you for 2.5 minutes.
J'ai pas beaucoup de temps, donc je vais être très rapide.
I don't have too much time, so I'll go very quickly. I thank Paul for his question. It leads me to think of something. Mr. Boy, you spoke about the low-intensity molecule. The goal is to place a value on CO2 to make it more competitive. As a new technology earlier, Mr. Boy, you spoke about the different types of hydrogen. So if you're going from gray hydrogen and then there's a value on CO2, certainly it would be maybe less interesting than the hydrogen that flows from hydroelectricity. Did I understand you clearly? Yes. The best way is to standardize it with a life cycle analysis. In that case, you're measuring the carbon content of each molecule for the final product. So whether you're using green hydrogen in biofuels or the gray hydrogen that has been used traditionally, that would have an impact on the final value of the product and the carbon footprint. So maybe it's better to have a single standard. That's the best way. Am I wrong if I say in the absence of a specific framework that would valorize this low carbon imprint? Would it be difficult to develop a market, or will we be doing it only for exportation? Yes, but if you look at the cost of production of hydrogen in the winter compared to the cost of production of rather green hydrogen compared to the methane reformer based on natural gas, there is a difference of at least $2 in the for a kilo. So it's hard to compete on the same market. Quick question for Ms. Trudeau. In your presentation, you said that the offer for renewable natural gases, that the demand is there. So why can't we respond to this demand? What measures could we take to satisfy that demand? I said we've been working for that on for 10 years. There are about 20 projects ongoing. There is one that's operational. It doesn't supply enough. So in Quebec, we have a legislation that forces us to have 1% or 2%, 5% in 20 years. And so it's the fact that when we have a greenfield project, you need approvals, constructions, and so on. So it's just the time required to get there so that there is a match between supply and demand. The supply is growing. So it's the same thing for hydrogen. If we want to reach a goal in 20, 30 years, we must start now. I don't want to take too much time, but I don't know on the price. I would like to say something on that. Is that possible? Very quickly then. To decarbonize, that has a cost. We have to do it for as low cost as possible. As Mr. Hutchins said, in Quebec, natural gas, the bill is a lot less than twice the cost. So instead of 30,000, it's 50,000, but electricity is 10,000. So we need something that doesn't require additional investments. And if one, okay.
Well, thank you. And I'll start by saying what I forgot to mention when I was talking to Mr. Hutchins in the previous round, and in partial answer maybe to what Mr. Zimmer was asking. I get renewable natural gas on my Fortis bill. It costs me about 3 times as much when you take into account the fact that I'm not paying any carbon pricing on that, et cetera. So that's certainly the consumer thing, and that's a big difference, and yeah. I'm hoping that can come down. And I think what I'll just stay with Mr. Hutchins, because he mentioned the costs of transporting. I think I heard you say, Mr. Hutchins, you were talking about the cost of transporting hydrogen, things, all these extra costs when we're developing new technologies, new transportation systems. Isn't that something where the governments, whether they be federal or provincial, should get involved so that it's not left up to the energy producers to shoulder and try to compete unfairly against old technologies? Something like an infrastructure, a hydrogen transportation infrastructure. And I'm not a hydrogen technologist, so I don't know what that would look like. But isn't that something where the government itself could step in and say, we're going to do this, just like we build highways, we provide money for the electrical grids between provinces and across the borders, et cetera. Isn't that something where the federal government could really make a difference?
Mr. Cannings, yes, I think, but it's not necessarily an industry or government conversation. It's probably both. There's ways that government can incentivize industry to actually invest in that type of infrastructure. Things like tax credits. We use those down in the U.S. quite a bit. But at the end of the day, it's really about which is the most economic result, because we know, right, that everybody, that our consumers, our constituents are going to pay the cost. It just depends where. Is it on a tax bill? Is it on a property bill? Is it on a fuel bill? Is it on an electricity bill? And we just have to make sure that we're looking at a big picture and seeing what has to be or should be developed. And frankly, there's, from a clean energy perspective, there is no shortage of people who want to invest in a clean energy, clean tech space. So yes, government can have a role, should have a role. It's just picking which role that government wants to have. Is it in incentivizing? Is it in order by fiat that we have to do something, or is it investing in the infrastructure itself?
Thank you, Mr. Hutchins.
Again, keep all those options open.
Right. Thanks, Mr. Koenigs. Mr. McLean, to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses here. We've heard some great input so far of what we need to consider at this. And I really appreciate all the information we're being given. I'm going to point my questions to Ms. Hansen here about, and first of all, Ms. Hansen, congratulations on your company's announcement earlier this week on your renewable natural gas partnership in Ontario. I think that's great news for the industry. But I wanted to, as much as some of my colleagues have drilled into the actual dollar cost of what we're talking about here, I'd like us to talk about the CO2 cost of what we're expending and the nature of how much CO2 is required, or power, if you will, is required to produce renewable natural gas vis-a-vis other natural gas. So what I'm looking for is a power input to a power output ratio, if you can, please.
Thank you, Minister McLean. This is for RNG or hydrogen?
You can give answers to both if you'd like.
Both. Okay. So for renewable natural gas, I would say that it really depends on what the source is. So if you are having an active landfill where you are capturing that, there may not be a significant incremental power input if you're just capturing that. So some of what we're doing with RNG is just to capture emissions that would otherwise vent to atmosphere. So there is some increased electrical input to clean it up, to scrub that and have that in. So I can provide you with that. That's part of the cost incremental that goes into the production of RNG. On the hydrogen side, again, it really depends on what that source of hydrogen is. Some of the advancements that are being made today, when you pair the hydrogen up with renewable sources like wind and solar, and it's used as an energy source, it depends what the pricing mechanism is within that existing franchise. If this is power that would otherwise be curtailed, you would have a very low cost for that power. And those would be the opportunities that we should be pursuing first, where you have that opportunity to capture that. So the right answer is that it varies quite a bit. And this is why we have to do a number of studies and look at where we can most optimize the infrastructure that we already have. As has been pointed out a number of times today in the comments, we have this incredible gas infrastructure in Canada that we should be looking to utilize.
Yeah. And agreed, Ms. Hansen. And let me get to my next question, if it could, please. I'm sorry, I've only got a limited amount of time here. You are obviously operating a pipeline across Canada, gas and natural gas pipeline as well, the one you bought in the States. Can you tell us, as far as the natural gas blend, what tolerance the pipeline will take as far as hydrogen percentage in that natural gas stream, please?
I think, as was pointed out by Mr. Hutchinson, it depends on the system. The system that we're going to blend in on a basis right now is 2 to 10%. It depends on the age of the infrastructure. For the larger transmission pipelines, that's where they're still doing some studies. But in certain locations throughout the world, it has blended up to 20%.
And thank you very much. Would that be in Europe where it's 20%?
Yes, in Germany.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving further on, as far as if I can get the same data from Mr. Bois at Enerchem on the cost of input for producing hydrogen at his facility, please.
we don't. Well, yes, sorry, I was muted. So we don't produce hydrogen. And in our Montreal facility, we will be importing hydrogen that will be produced by Hydro-Quebec in the adjacent electrolyzer that will be built.
Do you know what you'll be paying for that hydrogen?
Yes, I know, but it's confidential.
Okay. Is it more or less than the price of natural gas, and how much more? I get that might be a little.
Yeah, because now you need to convert.
I'll leave that question. I appreciate confidentiality, so I apologize for that. Mr. Chair, that's all the questions I have at this point. Thank you.
Okay, well, you're almost out of time anyway, so that worked out perfectly. Thank you. Mr. Saray, over to you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank all the witnesses. We can spend another 2-3 hours here. Thank you for being here. My first question for Mr. Boyce. You said as far as market conditions, favorable conditions, competitive markets, and when you look at bioenergy, hydrogen, it's an innovative technology. Do you have any specific recommendations to how to add value to these investments? Yes, there are several mechanisms that could be used. Some already exist. If you look at tax credits granted for the wind industry, for mining, development, petroleum mining. So there are well-known vehicles that are currently used. You can think of the flow-through shares and the benefits that are linked to those, the tax benefits. And so that's an incentive to corporations to invest in these activities. That's what I describe as the carrot. So if the regulatory instruments are not there to as an incentive to investments, well, we can use the carrot by using some of these existing mechanisms. Ms. Trudeau, I would like to have some of your opinions. When you have hydrogen production in low carbon content, you look at it in a broad scale. If you look at the situation in the medium and long term in Canada, what steps do we need if you're thinking of investments? In your case, what about the necessary infrastructure to have hydrogen used on a broad scale in Canada? One of the things that, when we're talking about a regulatory framework, is regulators that allow us to come up with pilot projects. That's not easy. So generally, we see that in the United States because we require pilot products. What we do is testing networks. They are not all made with the same material. An industrial client, for example, we have to be careful with the hydrogen blends because they have sensitive. We have 2 pilot projects for 2022 and close networks to see how far we can go. We have an industrial project in an urban heating plant in Montreal. So we will use hydrogen in this plant. So there will be studies, and this is where we can have some federal government assistance. But there's hydrogen injection. We can take certain pipes. We can have an energy network that is dedicated to hydrogen. Take hydrogen and CO2 on an industrial site, and so it becomes completely interchangeable. It's like natural gas. There is no limit. You can have 100%. So there are several mechanisms with hydrogen in gas networks. So we have to look at the natural gas as energy networks and how we can move towards decarbonization. Thank you. Mr. Valles, do you have any comments to add as far as the role of the federal government? Is it an infrastructure project, investment in the private sector? Yes, I think my comments would be similar to Ms. Trudeau. There is some infrastructure that could be shared, such as pipeline networks for transporting hydrogen. That could be quite beneficial. And there is a situation, it's very hard to balance the economic aspects of such a project. financial support, assistance, access capital that could be quite beneficial for us. Thank you.
We heard from our honourable colleague, Mario Simard, that the government strategy was grey, and that's not correct. But I just and you said earlier in your opening statement that we agree with Minister Regan's leadership and strategy. So I wanted you to expand a bit about our hydrogen strategy and your comments on what we've proposed and what we're planning on doing.
Thank you, Minister.
Very, very quickly, if you could. And I'm sorry for that, but we're running out of time.
Right. So what I would say is the strategy, we're excited about having an opportunity to develop that. Our thoughts are that it will be something that we need to, as Mr. Hutchinson said, develop over time. What we don't want to do is prevent that development by picking and choosing at this point. And we need to support all pathways and with a focus on delivering those low carbon reductions in the most affordable way.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Surrey. Mr. Patzer, over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for being here today. I'm going to start off with Enerchem. You'd mentioned to my colleague, Mr. McLean, that you're importing hydrogen. So I'm just curious, just right now, I mean, obviously without revealing any of the numbers, as you alluded to earlier, they're confidential, but is it economically beneficial for you to import hydrogen rather than try to develop and produce hydrogen here right now?
Yeah, so when I mean we're importing directly from a facility which will be on our site, and doing so, hydrogen has a high energy content, as some of my the witness mentioned. So by using hydrogen into our feedstock, so by adding this into our biofuels production, we basically double the yield. So with 1 ton of waste, for example, instead of producing 600 liters of biofuels, with hydrogen we can produce 1,200 liters of biofuels by tons of waste. So this is a huge benefit to the overall process and to the overall decarbonization process. So it's like a multiplier into our process.
Right. Okay. But you're not importing from a foreign company. Like it's from somewhere else in Canada. Essentially, you're bringing it into use. Is that correct?
Exactly. So it's green hydrogen produced by hydroelectricity.
Okay. Right on. Well, thank you for clarifying that, because I was just curious to know if there was a cost benefit from importing from a different country as opposed to to using domestic supply. So that's good to know it's domestic. Earlier you alluded to some predictable regulatory environments needed here. So I'm just curious just to know, with our existing regulatory system that's in effect, has there been any issues or holdups with the Impact Assessment Act as it currently is constituted?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, for any new developments, right, as you're trying to get into processing and trying to develop your product, has there been any? What's the interaction with the Impact Assessment Act been at this point?
Yeah, so we're always trying to be very very proactive and make sure that people understand what we're doing and the type of product we want to bring to market, so that then we can appreciate which carbon intensity is going to be attached to that end product, and hence the profitability that we're going to get from this investment. So that's how we've been interacting, and I'm not sure if I understand your question correctly or if I answer it correctly.
Well, yeah. So one of the issues that we've had in previous studies, as we've been hearing things with this, is just the timelines that it takes to get new production, to be able to get a new facility online. Yes. We were hearing for critical minerals for mining, there's upwards of 10 years and beyond because of the Impact Assessment Act. So I'm just curious if there's been any issues for biofuels with that.
No, it's been relatively, the authorities and everyone has been, very cooperative. So I would say that's probably, if this was our biggest concern, I think, it would be great.
Okay. Yeah. So the timelines have been pretty good then for getting things going. Okay. Thank you for that. In the brief that you sent to the committee, one of your recommendations say that renewable electricity is a zero carbon intensive. And I'm just wondering if you could explain what is meant by zero carbon intensive.
So, and if we look, in Quebec, for example, it's produced from hydroelectricity, and the CO2 emission of that, production are deemed to be zero or close to be zero, as per some regulators. So what we were saying is essentially, if this could be applied to every type of renewable electricity produced in Canada, and if we could use, instead of a direct connect, to get the benefit of that low carbon intensity, a book and claim system accordingly, this could enhance the ability to produce or install increase the install base of biofuels facility in Canada.
Okay, so does that mean that we be not necessarily taking the full entire life cycle footprint of what it takes to produce, and what to get a facility online? Again, we're looking at the entire picture here for our emissions, right? Like, does it exclude different parts of that, or is it focused on the entire life cycle?
Yeah, it's the entire life cycle. But let's say if I'm in Alberta and the grid has a higher carbon intensity, if one of my partner, for example, Suncor, has a windmill, I should be able to buy my electricity directly from that windmill, and then my real footprint would be very low, as opposed to using a higher carbon intensity electricity. So that's what we're saying in order to facilitate the implementation of projects in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Boyes, and thanks, Mr. Patzer. Okay, over to Mr. Weiler, aka the birthday boy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and fascinating discussion today, and looking forward to getting involved myself. First question I have is for Mr. Hutchins, and I want to pick up on something that my colleague from the NDP was touching on earlier, and that's the use of renewable fuels, and particularly hydrogen, through the existing networks for home heating. And touching on if we're going to have to potentially build out more infrastructure to transport clean fuels for this purpose, I'm curious why we would invest in blending and some of these other activities when there may be other options out there, such as looking to increasingly electrify heating and stoves through our existing electrical grid.
Yes, Mr. Wheeler, it just comes down to the cost impact, whether or not you're looking at using and utilizing existing infrastructure that we currently have that can move molecules, clean molecules, versus building new additional infrastructure. That's the difference. And I think Mr. Patzer brought up the IA, the impact assessment. Building new pipes, that's what makes our existing system so valuable and important right now, is to utilize that infrastructure, whether it's the existing pipes itself, whether it's the right of ways. It's really making sure that we're not ignoring the extreme value, the huge value that our existing infrastructure has, and the value that investors put in the ground and our customers have paid for. But to rebuild something new without figuring out how much you can use of the existing infrastructure I think would be a little bit short-sighted. Now, whether or not we look 50 years out and we see something that might change in year 10, 20, 30, or 40, yeah, then we can shift. But we don't know enough now to shift away and say we shouldn't be investing and in continuing making sure that these systems are resilient. And if I had more time, I'd tell you all about Texas. But that's a great lesson learned about how not to do it.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hutchins. Next question I have is for Mr. Berlez. Really exciting that you have the first large-scale green hydrogen plant in Canada with significant expansion potential. I know I've spoken to a lot of companies in BC that are interested in moving into the space and building offshore wind that can be used to produce green hydrogen. And they see demand in places like Japan for this. We also know Germany is very interested in purchasing green hydrogen from Canada. So my question to you is how were you able to accomplish this and be a first mover in this space in Canada?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So maybe just one precision. I mean, it's a project right now. The electrolyzer is not built yet. So we're moving forward with that project with our partner Gazifère. So the difference here, and I think one of the key element is that we're using our own electricity generation directly on site. So we're completely isolated from the grid and the Hydro-Quebec network. That allows us to be more competitive in terms of cost, and we will be delivering that hydrogen to our client that's basically sitting on a few kilometers away from us. So in terms of transportation, there is a lot of savings there. Compressing hydrogen, putting that on a ship and sending it to Europe has very high cost of transportation. This setup is optimal because we're producing on site with our own power, and the off-taker is very nearby. Hope that answers your question.
That absolutely does, and actually kind of leads to my next question for Ms. Hansen. Obviously, Enbridge has a huge network of natural gas linear infrastructure across North America, and I'm just curious, given that Enbridge does have a portfolio of renewable energy infrastructure as well, I'm wondering, is Enbridge looking at developing pipeline infrastructure for transporting hydrogen? And if so, what would be the relative cost of this relative to building out natural gas pipeline infrastructure?
Thank you for that question, Minister. Yes, we have had an opportunity to talk to some developers. There are obviously hydrogen pipelines existing in North America. It's part of the hydro-petrochemical chain already. And the cost for a hydrogen pipeline is similar to any pipeline construction. There are a few considerations. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my next question for Mr. Bois, you mentioned that
you've only got about 8 seconds left, Mr. Weiler. So.
Okay, well maybe I'll cede the rest of my time then. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Next, Mr. Simard.
Merci, James.
Thank you, James. Mr. Bois, well, I keep coming back to you, but I don't want to hassle you. In your presentation, I'll go quickly. You spoke about the need to create a market in bioenergy. Well, just a quick question. In politics, we often have these little bullet points, certain ideas, key ideas. If you had to put in place certain measures to create on the market such a bioenergy market, what short-term measures should be taken? Short-term, that's an excellent question. We have to set targets, very clear targets, to include biofuels in transportation, be it air transport, land transport, maritime transport. Secondly, is to base the system and reaching these goals. So this should be based on a standard, which is the carbon intensity, and linking the cost or the profits that people would obtain by using these fuels. So those would be the two basic elements in setting up what we call a low-carbon fuel standard. So basically, I'm not sure if I think in environmental terms, there is a good and a bad. Earlier you were talking about the stick and the carrot. Now, the carrots, right now in Canada, I think we are lagging behind in terms of numbers. Well, that's the least we could say, and I'm trying to be polite. British Columbia is at the forefront with its low-carbon fuel standard, which is somewhat based on California, Oregon, and so on. So that would be a great starting point. And that's the most forward-looking market currently in Canada. But in terms of goals, some of the very ambitious goals in the United States, in the European Union, we are light years behind, unfortunately. So it will be hard to catch up. I think Ms. Trudeau mentioned earlier that it's not when we wake up one day that the capacity will be developed. It's developed over 5 years. It costs hundreds of millions. So if we are aiming to achieve this in 2050, we don't have to wait too long. Quick question. I don't have much time. You spoke about investments in the innovative technologies. So Environ biofuels, have you received any funding from the federal government? Yes, indeed. It's a green infrastructure program. It's a federal provincial program. So we did receive $70 million in that project. Okay.
Well, thank you. I'm going to continue on with Monsieur Bois, picking up on something that I believe you were in your exchange with Mr. Patzer. You said you brought up an example about being able to use green energy from green sources when you were doing your projects. You used a Suncor windmill example. I have a small but very innovative and very old power plant in my riding, Silversmith Power in Sandon, BC. I believe it's actually the oldest operating hydroelectric system in the world. It's totally, it's green. It feeds off 5 creeks, so it's run of the river. There's no no dams involved, but it's operates on has the same amount of electricity being produced all year round. Calgary Transit wanted to use his power to run their electric transit system, but he was unable to sell those green, we talk about green molecules. He wanted to sell his green electrons to Calgary, but was unable to, and certainly was unable to get the value for them because he had to sell it into the BC hydro grid. And I'm just wondering how we can fix that. Is this a federal responsibility? Is it a provincial one? Is it a mix? Where is the regulatory change we need to make so that projects like that can get a fair price for their green electrons?
Yeah, so I'm really not an expert in regulation around new electricity, but I think one system that worked in other jurisdiction is really the book and claim system, where you can purchase your electricity because electrons are fungibles in system across new countries. So I can purchase that electricity directly from that producer, paying him the right price, and use a fungible electron on the grid. So it's not the direct connect approach, and I think this is probably what preventing the Calgary Transport Authority from using that green electricity.
Thank you, Mr. Kennings. Okay, over to Mr. McLean for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to go back to Mr. Bois here, please. Mr. Bois, one of the things you mentioned in your introduction was that electrification will not get us towards our climate GHG reduction goals, and I appreciate that because I think there's a bit of a mantra out there that electrifying everything is going to accomplish this. But can you, as we say, there's no benefit here without cost. Can you talk about the cost that is actually attributed to your biofuels plant and the investment required to make that happen on a fixed cost basis, and how much CO2 you may have measured that's involved in the production of that facility?
So you talk about the effective production of the product or building the plant?
Building the plant.
So that's a very good question. We haven't calculated that. It's the first time I'm being asked this question. So the way it works right now is the life cycle analysis looks at every entrant or every product or chaque entrant intrant dans le
input, every input in production.
If this includes the construction, so the energy used for the construction, I would have to get back to you, Mr. McLean, on this. I don't have an answer for you.
Well, if you could, please, it's that whole life cycle analysis that I think the committee would really benefit from. And thank you, Mr. Bois. I'll move to back to Ms. Hansen here. Ms. Hansen, just in relation to some of the questions you may have heard here today, can you let the committee know, if you have it at your hands, how much electricity we would have to build in Canada if we were to do away with the natural gas network?
Thank you, Minister McLean. I'll give you a reference point for Ontario. In Ontario, you would have to build out at least 90,000 megawatts to eliminate what we have in Ontario. I think we, through the Canadian Gas Association, have thought that it's going to be close to $1 trillion at just a high level estimate. But maybe I'll ask my colleague Jean Benoit to comment on Quebec.
About Quebec is just for removing natural gas. We're not talking about oil and petroleum related to cars. Just removing natural gas is less impactful, but it's a 15,000 megawatt. So we have to build a new Grande Baleine project in Quebec that is not under construction actually. So it's just like not there to be able to do it.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the reference. The 15,000 would be a Grande Baleine project. So we're talking about a substantial amount of power here that would have to be replaced. I think I still got a few minutes here. I'm going to flip around here to Mr. Verlez. Mr. Verlez, one of the things you talked about here was one of the roles of the federal government here is to facilitate access to funding. Mr. Verlez, I know you're owned by one of the most deepest financial organizations in Canada. If anybody has access to all kinds of funding, it's your organization. So explain what you mean more, please, by the federal government facilitating access to more funding for a Brookfield entity, please.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So what I could say is that, as Brookfield is investing billions of dollars every year in renewable assets around the globe. We have a new transition fund that's just been announced, and we aim on investing in renewable and any new technology that's in the transition. So the thing is, we need these projects to be financially viable, and there is some, the traditional banks in Canada do not have a lot of appetite for these new types of projects as they have for, let's say, a wind farm or a solar project. So in order to facilitate the financing of these projects, the government can provide support through the Canadian Infrastructure Bank or in other ways to kind of compensate for that lack of appetite of the financial institutions, at least for the first projects, until they get comfortable enough that these projects can be financed on their own. And I hope that answers your question.
It does. So really, you're talking about social financing through subsidized means of the government.
That's right. Or loans from CIB that could be, that would take maybe an additional risk from the start on the technology and the fact that these projects are not currently, deployed large scale.
So unpriced risk.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. And last up today is Mr. Weiler. Again, over to you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to jump back onto a topic that's been brought up by Mr. Bois, but I'd also like to ask Madame Trudeau the same question. Mr. Bois, you mentioned that we need to develop the market for these clean fuels locally. You mentioned some examples of California and the Netherlands where there is an attractive market for low carbon fuels. I think you also mentioned BC with the LCFS as something that really helps create that market. At the federal level, we do have the Clean Fuel Standard, which of course requires refiners to produce fuels increasingly with a lower carbon intensity. So with this in mind, I'm wondering what is needed, or what do you see that is needed on top of this to create this type of a market across Canada?
I would say that's a start, but like I think one of your colleagues mentioned, there's no clear obligation and there's no clear mandate with preset targets for blending, for example, biofuels. So this would enable, and then if people don't meet, let's say an obligor doesn't meet their target, then there's a cost attached to this. So this will create an environment where it's either the cost of compliance, either you buy the product, and if you don't buy the product and you don't comply, then there's a cost to be incurred towards society. So I think that's the other thing which is missing, for example, in the current framework. and that's something we need to if we want this to happen, there needs to be a consequence.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask the same question to Madame Trudeau.
Merci. Comme disait Monsieur.
Thank you. As Mr. Boyce said, I think we need a mix of the sticks and carrots, basic regulations with previsibility. We're talking about 5% for 25, but we haven't yet adopted the rule for 10% for 30. We have to go 20, 25, 30. That would give an obligation. That's very important. It's a binding aspect. The clean fuel standard would give great value to the renewable fuels. Our refinery clients are already asking us a lot of questions, but we should also assist. I'm thinking about cement plants that are still using coal, and they have to compete with other jurisdictions. If we want them to be more clean, and maybe at the start we should assist them, provide some assistance so that they can pay for the difference between coal and natural gas, and then later we can reduce the grants. But the difference between carbon and natural gas is great. Some clients just need a little push, just a little support in their transition. And one more thing to do, we didn't talk about the impact. We spoke about the cost. There is a study shows that in Quebec, in construction, it's 88,000 new jobs. So we haven't spoken about some of the economic aspects of the circular economy. I can send some more information to the committee.
And I know our hydrogen strategy is estimated that could be over 350,000 jobs just in that sector by 2050 in Canada. So I think we definitely need to keep in mind the opportunity that's ahead of us here. And with that in mind, Ms. Hansen, you mentioned in your opening that you're looking to develop a green hydrogen corridor. I was hoping you could just expand a little bit more on these plans and what's driving them.
Thank you, Minister. Because of where our existing infrastructure is located in Ontario, we have our compressed natural gas refueling stations along the 401 corridor. And then we have our current power to gas green hydrogen facility located in Markham, Ontario. So we're looking at how we can tie into that existing infrastructure. The CNG stations can be converted to hydrogen, and we can use those as hydrogen fueling stations. We also have an opportunity with our existing infrastructure in Ontario and Quebec to look at how we can serve and create that dynamic. We service, obviously, the Sarnia industrial area as well. So because of our existing infrastructure, particularly in Ontario and Quebec, we can work with some strategic players to really develop that market. And we also have a similar opportunity in Alberta with our existing infrastructure there and into BC along with Fortis, how we serve with our gas pipeline infrastructure.
And that's very interesting. And what is the process like to actually convert those types of equipment? And is there a big cost associated with that?
Very, very quickly, Ms. Hansen.
So the refueling stations, they are already hydrogen ready so that there wouldn't be an incremental cost. It depends where it is on the system and what we're connecting to. And so there's a wide variability.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Weiler. That's all the time.
Mr. Chair, a point of order.
Yeah, Mr. Zimmer, go ahead.
Yeah, just quick. I just wanted to remind a friendly reminder to Mr. Hutchins just about providing that cost differential between renewable natural gas and regular natural gas, and any other information that he'd like to submit to committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, on that note, I just want to say thank you very much to all of our witnesses. We very much appreciate your time and the very valuable information that you passed along today. And as Mr. Zimmer just reminded us, that may be coming in the future. And to committee members, reminder that on Monday we will continue with our in-camera session to finalize the previous report. And then next Friday we will return to this study. So, and on the first point, if there are any further proposals that we're going to be talking about on Monday, be grateful if they could be passed along in advance. On that note, meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a safe and enjoyable weekend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses.